join.
You guys can see my screen?
Yes.
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 So you don't see the little pictures of me and Hank and Janet on the side?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
You
Mhm.
do?
Yes.
We'll get rid of that then. Who wants to see us?
It's fine. Fire it away. Let's see. Video. Video. Well, are we starting or not? Is it 7? 1 minute till?
It's 6:58 according to my clock up here. But we're going to give folks a few more minutes because we think we'll have some stragglers coming. So we're going to wait till at least 5 minutes after the hour before we get started. So talk amongst yourself. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, how are you, Michael?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great.
Good.
Hey, I got you down for celebrations. You know what I
I
need?
know. I need to send my bio and my information and a photo to Minetta so she can send it on.
There you go.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, I went out and stole one of your pictures already.
Oh,
Yeah,
perfect.
Michael, you did get the, you got my email about Michael Winters representing us at Celebration? Great,
Yes.
good.
Okay, I would let it go.
I need to get you that information though. I have not sent it to you, Michael, so I will get it to you.
Okay,
Michael, how you
Michael.
doing?
I didn't know you were there.
I'm here. Here I am.
Your mother had a great taste in names.
Indeed. Indeed she did.
Your middle name wouldn't happen to be Joseph, would it?
No, it's Ralph. My
Ah.
oldest brother's name is Joseph.
Okay, okay. There you go. My youngest brother's name is Joseph.
Wow. A question about that. The lady who did all the voiceover on the ad, is that AI?
Yes.
It's really freaky. It was really freaky. I gotta tell you.
She's pretty good, I thought.
It's
Yeah, but there are some grammatical errors.
there's just something in there
She
that
can't
made
she
me
can't say
laugh.
Tejas.
No, she can't say Tejas. That's true.
I don't know.
We-
She's freaking me out.
We're still learning, Valerie.
Oh. How long is this class going to go tonight? Do we know?
To
Hang on.
9.
Hey,
We're scheduled till 9.
okay. I may have to cut out a little early, but okay.
So guys, we already said that we're going to wait till 5 after the hour, and then we'll get started, just in case people are caught up in traffic. So
Yep.
in case you're wondering,
Great.
that's we're all here.
Caught up in traffic on Zoom?
Well, some of us have a hard time making it up the stairs.
in traffic.
Right.
True. I just thought maybe Michael was checking to see if we were actually listening.
They could be caught up in traffic trying to get home to get on Zoom.
Yep.
Crazy time to be out on the road this time of night.
Yeah. Has it gotten cooler in Texas now?
No, it's 101 still.
No, really? Where
Yep.
are you, Jane?
San Antonio.
Oh my gosh. I thought it was starting to.
We're under 100 in Houston with less humidity. Feels like winter to me next to.
Oh, come
Yeah.
on, come on.
We've cooled down to
Oh,
97.
really?
Yeah,
No, it's cooled
it's-
down. It's cooled down. No, it has cooled down a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chester, take a look at the waiting room, please.
Rain, hi, how are you? It's so good to see you.
Yes, it's good to be with all of you. And by the way, it's in the 90s in Austin, and I am not complaining.
Because that's a cool spell here in Texas, right?
Absolutely Arctic chill.
Oh, yeah, it's freezing, it's freezing.
That's right. You know what this weekend is? It's the mark
That's
of
right.
3 more months of summer.
No, it's Yom Kippur.
I just got back from Ireland with 68 to 72 there.
Oh, wow.
That was decent.
Okay,
Never
we,
get- never get
Chester, we
top
got
bills.
somebody in the waiting room. Is this a person that?
It's not popping up for me.
Oh, okay, I'll admit.
Well, that part of them are.
That's weird. Okay, I'll keep an eye on that too. If it's taking more than a minute.
Is Steve McClure signed on? Steve,
Yes.
I'm here.
happy birthday.
Thank you.
Janet, I'm sorry to bother you, but those announcements, are you going to leave them on chat?
Yes, I will,
You want
yeah,
to leave them there? Okay, now, okay. That's okay. I don't have to refer to them now. As long as they're there, I can.
well,
refer to them
anybody
later.
who joined after those were posted do not see them. They're invisible to only people at the time it was posted.
Okay, well, but I mean, later on, they'll be visible so I can talk about them, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I figure, I think I understand Michael's doing this slide or this video, and then I might do the slide for just a few seconds about North Texas Giving Day. Today's the last
Mhm.
day.
Right.
And last I looked, about 2 o'clock this afternoon, we were at 1,300.
Mhm.
We had a $2,000 goal, and I think we might meet that, maybe break it, which would be wonderful. And
Fabulous, yeah.
certain donations, they have lotteries or kind of drawings every hour, and it's just random luck of the draw as to, if an organization is selected for an extra charitable bonus.
So guys, my clock
Donation.
says 7:05, so everybody should be out of traffic by now. And those who aren't, they'll add on, and we'll be here when they get here. So first thing is welcome. Really glad that everybody who did showed up, and for those who aren't here and on their way, glad for you guys too. In case you're wondering where you're at, this is the Texas Storytelling Association's virtual guild event, and the association tries to show support for the guilds by sponsoring different events for the guilds throughout the year. So far, we've had the Dallas Storytelling Guild, who had Texas Tales last month, and today we've got the Houston Storytelling Guild, and they're going to be represented by Hank Roubicek, and he's going to be talking to us about how we can be better at personal storytelling. And then in January, we have the North 40 Guild that's planning for their workshop, and that workshop's going to be on technology, and it's going to be presented by our one and only Dean Keith. So we'll get a chance to learn even more about how to use Zoom and anything else that's out there technical. So other announcements, Celebrations is coming up. We have 9 slots so far. I think I have heard from at least 7 different guilds. So if you're one of the guilds out there who hasn't submitted someone, just send their name and to me, and later on we'll need their bio and their picture. And it's a good opportunity to tell some stories at Celebration. The theme for Celebration is going to be gratitude. So it'll be Thanksgiving time, and we all have a lot to be grateful for on November 18th. Then I want to make sure you guys know that we're recording this session, so it'll be uploaded onto our YouTube channel so that you can see it in the future. Also know that in case you need it, captions are enabled. And with that, I want to share with you the little announcement, and then I'm going to have Jan talk about North Texas Giving. So enjoy this little AI lady.
Members of the Tejas Storytelling Association, welcome to an extraordinary journey into the world of storytelling. We're thrilled to present a workshop designed exclusively for you, our esteemed members. In collaboration with the renowned Houston Storytelling Guild, we proudly introduce Unveiling Your Inner Storyteller. Save the date, Thursday, September 23rd, 2023. Join us from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. CST. The workshop will take place on Zoom, and the link will be shared with you before the event. Get ready to be inspired by our distinguished presenter, Hank Roubicek, a true legend in storytelling. With an impressive background, including being the founder of So What's Your Story on KPFT 90.1 FM and hosting the Story Voice podcast. He's a Houston Moth storytelling champion, recipient of the Trailblazers Award, and a renowned professor emeritus of communication studies. Prepare to embark on a captivating storytelling adventure. In Unveiling Your Inner Storyteller, Hank Roubicek will reveal the secrets to crafting mesmerizing narratives. Dive into the art of amplifying conflict, creating vivid imagery, and mastering impactful beginnings and endings. This immersive experience will empower you to share your stories in a way that resonates deeply. As a valued member of the Tejas Storytelling Association, this workshop is our gift to you. Reserve your spot by registering in advance at the provided link. Upon registration, you'll receive a confirmation email with all the essential details. Don't miss this extraordinary chance to refine your storytelling skills. Join us on Zoom for an unforgettable evening of storytelling exploration. Elevate your storytelling prowess and uncover the treasures within your own experiences. We can't wait to see you there.
So, of course, all you guys are already here, but we just wanted to play around and have fun with our little AI lady. It's one of those crazy things. I think with COVID, we learned that we have a lot more meetings and a lot more storytelling that happens on Zoom, even though a lot of us would like to be close together so that we could hug and look into each other's eyes. But since we have to do that, it's kind of good to learn a little bit more about how to use it. So that's another good reason to show up for in January for a Dean's Workshop. Now, I want to give Janet some time to tell you about Texas Giving Day, and then we're going to turn it over to Hank. You got it, Janet?
Hello. North Texas Giving Day is an annual event, but it starts on the 1st of September and ends on the 21st of September each year. And this is about the 15th year that Tejas has been a participant, and almost 4,000 different nonprofit organizations are participating. And I saw earlier this afternoon, over $4 million have been donated. We have about 1,300 donated as of 2 or 3 p.m. this afternoon, and our goal is 2,000. The event does end at midnight tonight. The direct link to give $5, $25. Somebody's gave a lot more. We thank you. That is in your chat, and so you can look for the link in your chat. And thank you for giving, and thank you for helping TSA in all its different ways of its work.
Thank you, Janet. Hey, one last thing, guys, before we get started. I just noticed that our president, Rick Davis, is online, and I want to make sure, Rick, do you have anything that you want to say before we get started? I don't hear anything. So we'll say that we hope that you're feeling good. So, Hank, you got it, man.
Thank you, Michael. Boy, that introduction, make sure my mother gets that, because She's going to want to hear that. Boy, that was amazing. That was pretty impressive. Thank you. Michael suggests that I'm somehow a master storyteller, and that is not true. I know master storytellers. I know the list, and I'm not on it. So it really is an honor to be here for a lot of reasons. My primary interest in storytelling, I'll just say this before we start talking about the niceties of personal narratives. I've always been committed to bringing storytelling to the community. So that's something I'm really very proud of. As far as teacher, writer, radio host, and the like, it's really important to be able to bring storytelling to the community. So that's my love in life. Next to my wife, my son, and my Chihuahua, storytelling is right up there. It's very challenging to talk about personal telling in many ways. Very, very challenging. Because unlike traditional stories, there is no once upon a time, there is no live happily ever after. These kind of stories, personal narratives, are molded in clay, like clay, tweaking the ingredients that we need in order to make this recipe that creates a personal narrative as appetizing to our listeners as possible. Stories are powerful. They validate us. We already know that. But stories also create a kind of human understanding that no other mode of expression can possibly foster. They heal, they solve problems, they create an understanding like no other. We had a storytelling guest on my radio show 2 weeks ago, Pam Farrow. Some of you may know her, and she was very articulate. She said that a story is the closest distance between two people. And I thought about that because I think that really conceptualizes the personal narrative best. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Kaminsky Method on Netflix. It's one of my favorite series, and it was with Alan Arkin and Michael Douglas. And they're both wonderful storytellers in their own right. Alan Arkin plays a Hollywood producer, and Michael Douglas is his friend who has an acting studio. They're good friends. Alan Arkin's wife dies. And of course, his friend, Sandy, the Michael Douglas character, wants to stay with them for a few days while he goes through the mourning because they're friends. So they're at a supermarket, and Alan Arkin asks Sandy, what is it you want for dinner? And Sandy says, I don't care. And the Alan Arkin character says, let me get some cold cuts. So he walks up to the deli counter and he asks the deli man, what is your best ham? And the deli man says, they're all good. And Alan Arkin says, let me put it in story form. You've committed a heinous crime. You've murdered dozens of people. So many people, it's countless. You're a dead man. You are going to be executed. Oh, there are appeals, but none of them is working. It's the night before you're being fried, and you are asked, what do you want for your last meal? You say, ham. What kind of ham would you order? It would be honey glazed. Well, then I'll have a half a pound of honey glazed, deli man. It was a way of engaging him into a conversation that I loved because it reminded me of me growing up, because everything was in story form, not unlike what he pointed out in that wonderful, wonderful episode. I was raised by my grandparents. Many of you know that. My grandparents and my mother, my brother, my father left when I was very young. He was not a bad man, but he was ill. He was sick. So I'm very glad that I have my grandparents around. And my grandmother didn't say anything unless it was in story form. You couldn't say good morning to her without hearing a story. That's just the way she was. So, for example, I would go up to her and I would ask her, Grammy, what is for dinner? And she would say to me, sit down, I have a story to tell you. Well, I'd sit down and she would tell me a story about this little boy at the carnival. Now, I had no idea where she was headed here, but I had to sit there for a good 20 minutes. And at the end of the story, I realized that the story was about, don't ever ask me again what's for dinner. If I asked her other questions and she didn't have a story, she would do something that would prompt a story. So, for example, if I would ask her, Grammy, do you like my girlfriend? She would say, well, I was at the post office last week and I didn't see her picture up on the wall. I'd say, well, okay, fine, but do you like her? Well, she had dinner here the other night and I could see that she could use a knife and fork. I'd ask her a third time, but do you like her? Well, I'm sure she didn't kill anybody. Well, I got the idea. This is her way of saying she's just average. It's no big deal. You can probably do better. At the age of 17, I couldn't figure it out, but that is what she meant. But everything was in story form. As a matter of fact, there were some stories she used to tell me that sounded like folktales, but they were actually personal narratives. I didn't realize that till later in life. I remember telling her about a friend of mine who was engaged for the fourth time. He was engaged 4 times to 4 different women. And he was, I want to get this straight, now he was engaged a 5th time. Okay. And I was telling her about it. Instead of saying, oh, that's interesting, I hope it works out, tell me more. Instead, she said, let me tell you about Uncle Sam. Now, Uncle Sam is one of her younger brothers. And of course, I'm sitting there doing what I usually do. My God, here it comes again, rolling my eyes. I should have known better, but here comes another story. And she says, Uncle Sam came over here from Slobodka. You heard that, right? That's an actual city in Lithuania in 1931. And he was going to school. And he was a very interesting young man because he only had 2 shirts, she told me. And he could never decide which shirt to put on to go to school. He also would go to school and study things. And we would always ask him, what class do you like best? It was an English-oriented school for those who were immigrants. So he took spelling, he took handwriting, he took history, he took English, he took reading, and he never could decide which subject he liked best. You could never take him to a candy store because he could never decide on what he wanted. So he'd walk out candyless. He never had any candy, she would say. As a matter of fact, he used to really like this cafeteria, she ponders. A little bit older, when she was a little bit older, it was called the Hot Shop, and it's a cafeteria. And we used to go to this cafeteria. You could take whatever you want, but he couldn't decide what to take. So typically, he just watched us eat. So he never got any candy. He never knew what he really liked in school. There were times that he missed school because he didn't have a shirt to put on. And that was your Uncle Sam. And I would ask, okay, what's the point? And she would look at me and say, hold off buying a suit. So you see, it just goes in full circle. And if that wasn't interestingly enough, we all know what an apocryphal story is. Well, I learned that apocryphal stories take so many different forms. She used to venture into this form as well, unknowingly. Whenever I had a argument with my mother, or she yelled at me, or I yelled at her, or, slammed doors, whenever I said a bad thing about my mom, my grandmother would step in and she would tell me this incredible story. That's the only word I can think about. She says, there was a young man who was going to be married, but his fiance said to him, I will only marry you if you murder your mother. I'm thinking, yes, if you murder your mother, that's the only way I will marry you. Well, I'm not going to murder my mother, the young man says. Well, then you understand the consequences. I am not going to marry you. That's all there is to it. But I love you. I need you. I want you. I have to have you. Now, of course, when my grandmother is telling me the story in Yiddish, it's even funnier. But he says, I'm not going to kill my mother. Well, then you know the consequences. We can't get married. He says, okay. All right. I'll do it. I'll kill my mother if you promise you marry me. So the young man goes into the kitchen while his mother is preparing dinner. He grabs one of those huge knives, like Michael Myers in Halloween, walks up to his mother and stabs her to death. So he thinks. His mother plummets to the ground. He's terrified, thinking that he leaves her there for dead. And he runs out of the house, and on his way, he trips over a rug. And his mother, who's not yet dead, raises her head and asks, "Did you hurt yourself?" Well, I thought about that one for a moment, and that's kind of an apocryphal story, isn't it? I mean, is that really any different than George Washington not really chopping down a cherry tree? But if he had, he'd walk up to his father and say, "Pa, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down that cherry tree with my little hatchet." I mean, is that any different really than the story my grandmother came up with? A mother about the intensity of unconditional love. George, about unconditional honesty and integrity. In both cases, there are stories about human character, are they not? Well, this is the kind of stuff that I was raised with, I guess you could say. And I was always encouraged to tell stories. And in doing so, I discovered an awful lot that I realized later in life had a lot of merit. In fact, I realized when I was in graduate school that everything I learned from my grandmother was incredibly true. And she actually knew a lot more than my graduate school professors about the power of human narratives. But I discovered so much growing up, and I understood what the power of narrative really was. It's a matter of recognizing that when stories are told in a way that we feel absorbed and inspired, it's because the storyteller is allowing us through the windows of their souls. They're taking us on a journey and then returning us safely to the present. Because when you think about it, a story is told in a way where it's really a verbal icon, a verbal and nonverbal icon. It's a representation of an act. We're not there when a story is told, right? It's always past tense. It doesn't sound very profound, but think about that, because that's the reason why we keep saying we have to bring people to the story. We have to take them there because they've never been there. So that's an adage I want us to think about. Well, what I'd like to be able to do then is to kind of think about what I learned from her, and in a way that I've learned from her, have us learn tonight by sharing some stories, listening to some stories, offering some examples, and to learn how these components are really an integral part of the story form. Because the more we listen, the more we pay attention, the more we observe each other, the more we watch stories and listen stories, the better we're going to become at telling stories. That's obvious. But what I learned is that we are all natural storytellers. I also learned that structure is really essential, right? Because structure is the one thing that makes a story coherent. Sometimes we structure stories thematically, sometimes chronologically, sometimes sequentially. But what I have found over the years is that people who tell personal stories are sometimes really confused about the kind of organizational style they should use in order to maximize the effectiveness of that narrative. Also, I learned that the story has to resonate. There has to be some kind of emotional connection between the storyteller, the story, and the audience. It's got to resonate. That's what keeps us sitting there for 20 minutes or a half hour or 5 minutes or an hour to listen to a story. And also, and this is one that is a little trickier because some people might disagree with this, and that's okay. But a story has to be relentlessly focused. A story isn't about your wedding day. A story is about the moment you saw your wedding cake and it said, "Congratulations, Harry and Susie, and your name is Jack and Jill." That's the moment of your story. It's that moment of conflict. And there's some controversy to that, but we're going to be talking about that as well. We also know that in a good personal narrative, like in any story, we need a good, powerful first line. We need a good sense of closure. We need to make sure it has a rich, developed character, that it has some kind of conflict, a defined arc, as we know it as storytellers, and also an ability to own the story, to give ourselves permission to tell it, to reveal whatever information is in it, and to feel good about it, and to take risks, knowing that the information we're sharing is somewhat private, but still we're letting people in through the windows of our soul. Another thing that is a little bit not so much controversial, but a difference of opinion, is that A story, a personal story, should speak for itself. In a traditional story, like a folktale, we read things like slow and steady wins the race. It's got the parable. But that's not really necessary, or in some circles, not even effective. So when I tell a story, I don't want to end it by saying, oh, by the way, if you didn't get it, that was a story about hope. That was a story about being nice. That was a story about being generous, everyone. It's the story that's the message. And as the story unfolds, it's the message that should be absorbed through that story. So what I would like an opportunity to do, if you'd indulge me, is I'm going to serve up some tips and anecdotes about these principles that I've just shared with you in this exhaustive list, the way that I learned them. And that is by sharing stories and together by discovering how they work together well. Let's start with the idea of being a natural storyteller. I can give you all the theory. It's called A Narrative Paradigm by Walter Fisher, 1954 at Stanford, made it very clear that people are natural storytellers because it's the only way to establish meaning. It's a way of creating an expression. It's a way of finding a way to express it. And it's a way of gaining understanding. It's a three-point process. We take words and symbols and we put it into some meaningful form in order to foster understanding. It sounds complicated, but it really isn't. It's simply a matter of knowing that stories work. That's why Ferris Bueller comes up with an extravagant story to make sure that his parents know that he's home when he's really out having a good time. Kids learn it at a very young age. But natural storytellers exist all over the place. And sometimes they don't even think not only that they're natural storytellers, but most of them I find don't even think they're good storytellers at all. 2 years ago, it was right after COVID, it was in 2021, I was sitting in a bar. I took my wife to the Wortham Theater. She plays flute for the Houston Ballet Orchestra. It was during Nutcracker. So I'm in a bar having a few drinks before I had to pick her up. And about 5 stools away, I'm sitting here in caddy corner. There's a gentleman about 40 years old who's having a drink, and he turns to me. We're the only two at the bar. And he says, have you ever had any regrets? I said, sure, I have regrets. I would imagine everybody does. Well, I've got a story that I really want to tell someone. May I tell you the story? Well, he doesn't know who I am, doesn't know I love to hear stories. So I said, yeah, go ahead, buy me a drink first. No, but go ahead and tell me the story. He sits there and he says, well, I'm from Boston, he says. And I just moved here to Houston a couple of months ago, and I'm really bothered by something. A couple of months, I had to live in a small room in a very large Victorian house in Boston, 3 stories, because I sold my house and I needed a place to live. So I rented a room in this large Victorian. Getting ready to move to Houston. I was unpacking a few things. I was really busy. I had a lot on my mind, he said. And as I'm unpacking, there's a knock at the door. I answer the door, and an elderly woman asks, excuse me, do you have any flour? Can I borrow some flour? I said, ma'am, I'm sorry. I don't have any flour. I'm unpacking. I don't cook. I'm moving in a few days. So forgive me. I don't have anything. Okay. So I closed the door. She left. About 15 minutes later, there's another knock at the door, and I answer it. It's the same woman. And she asks, excuse me, do you have any sugar? And he says, ma'am, I didn't have any flour, and I really don't have any sugar. As I told you, I don't have any kind of ingredients here. I don't cook. I don't clean. I'm just unpacking a few things. Please, I don't have any sugar. And she left. A few minutes later, another knock at the door. Same woman. Do you have any salt? I was a little annoyed, he tells me. A little annoyed. And I said to her, ma'am, Look, I don't have any damn flour. I don't have any damn sugar. And I certainly don't have any salt. I don't have any one of the three. I don't cook. I'm really busy. I don't want to be rude, but you're kind of annoying me. Please, please leave me alone. And she leaves. I had some errands to do, he said. So I went down the street to run a few errands, and I came back about 45 minutes later. And when I did, I saw this maintenance man on the third story of this large Victorian, tall Victorian. And I asked him what he was doing. And he said, oh, there was a tenant here, an old woman who jumped a few minutes ago. She killed herself. And I looked at him and I remember exactly what I said. I said, you don't think that you can tell a story? And when I think of that story, I get all choked up because it was a wonderful story and it was so authentic. See, he was the only one who could have told that story. I'm not even doing it justice. He was the only one who could tell that story. That's the power of personal narratives. When you tell a story, your attitude has got to be, I'm the only one who can tell this. And don't you dare get up and leave until I tell you to, because you're going to like the story, because I've got a story to tell and you need to hear it. So please sit there and listen. That has to be the mental imagery in your mind. Well, that's what he was doing. That is a natural storyteller. He had a need to tell a story. He never studied storytelling, I don't think. He was very uncomfortable even thinking about himself as a storyteller. Many years ago, when I first started to teach storytelling, I had a similar experience. There was a young man who came to my office, very, very formal, very nice. And he said, Dr. Roubicek, I'm really nervous because I know in this first assignment, you want us to tell a story about a memorable event. I don't have anything. I'm not an interesting person. I don't have any events. I don't know what to say. And I'm going to drop the class. I said, well, don't do any of that. Let's talk a little bit about your life. What's coming up? Tell me a little bit about who you are. Tell me a little bit about what you are. And he thought about it. And after a few minutes, he said, well, I have to go to this anniversary of sorts, this party that my parents are, that my family are having, because it's the anniversary of my dad's death. I was 13 years old when he died. And I'm 19 now, and this has really been a hard 6 years. And when I go to this, what they want me to do is tell them how I feel about my dad's death, but I'm mad at him. I'm angry at them all. I want to hit him. I want him to just drop dead myself. I'm really pissed off at him. He was really, really, really mad. So we talked about how to calm that down, and I asked him what he might want to say. So he was in my office a long time, and he scratched out some thoughts and some notes, and I didn't know what he would come up with, but here's what I did on purpose. The following Tuesday, I knew that he would be telling his story. That's the day he was assigned to tell his story. And I wanted him to go last. I purposely had him go last because I knew that he might run a little over. And you know what it's like at the end of class. Everybody starts grabbing their books. You don't need a clock. You don't need a watch. You know it's time for class to end. And I knew that he would run into the end of class. I was confident that nobody would want to leave. That's the beautiful thing about storytelling. Nobody wants to leave. It's the most unselfish mode of expression that we could ever fathom. This is the story that he told. I just wanted to read it to you, if I may. Okay. Well, another year has passed since my father's death, and on this anniversary of his death, I really feel compelled to tell all of you how mad I am at you. You think I handled it so well. You think I was such a man. Well, I'm not a man. I was only 13. I was a boy. I don't want to be a man. You wouldn't let me cry. You wouldn't let me talk about it. And I'm really angry about that. I remember I was playing video games with my cousin Gabe, and I wasn't worried about anything because my dad came home every day at 5:30 from the hospital. He was being treated at MD Anderson. And it was kind of interesting because even before he was being treated, he used to come home from work at 5:30. So he came home at 5:30 all the time, no matter where he was and what he was doing. But you told me I had to get my bags together because he wasn't coming home today. I wasn't really worried at first, but when we got to the hospital, my grandmother came up to me, hugging me. She never hugs me, but she hugged me that night. And she asked me if I was all right. I said, yeah, why wouldn't I be all right? Then my mother came out and she hugged me too. And then the doctor came out. Some guy who looked as cold as the room itself. And he said, son, I'm glad you're here. Your father isn't doing well. And the reason why you're here is because according to his last will and testament, the entire family has to agree about taking him off of life support. Well, I'm 13 years old. I have no idea what this guy's even talking about. Not at all. Besides, my dad's coming home at 5:30, isn't he? So I said, well, what does that have to do with me? Well, you've got to decide whether or not you want your dad to be off of life support. Why don't you go see him? I didn't want to, but I walked into my father's room and I knew that he was not going to make it. I saw him and I remember everything about him. See, he used to hug me a lot because he meant it. He never said a bad word about me. He never said a bad word about anyone. He just played ball with me and took me to camp and took me fishing. And he always thought that I was fine just the way I was. And he always reminded me of that. But I knew that he wouldn't make it. So I agreed with the rest of the family to take him off of life support. So we did. And I came home that night. And what none of you know is that at 5:30, I walked outside and sat on the front stoop and I waited for him. And he wasn't there. And then I waited the next day at 5:30 and he still wasn't there because I couldn't believe he wouldn't be there. You know why? Because my dad never lied to me. I mean, he never lied to me. So I was mad at all of you and I was mad at him too because this is the first time you lied to me. He didn't come home. It's 6 years later. And I know he's not coming home, but every once in a while, at 5:30, I think he will. I always have a hard time getting through that story, but understand why I'm sharing it with you. Remember what he said, I don't have a story to tell. I want to drop the course. I'm not a storyteller. I'm nothing. I'm just a guy who's not interesting. I've got nothing to share. Well, the first thing that we have to really come to grips with is that no person who tells a personal story is a non-personal storyteller. The problem is that we have to have something to share, something worthwhile. We have to have a sense of communication, an ability to talk to people, not at them, an ability to share rather than simply give information. And ultimately, it's a way of getting people involved in our message rather than away from our message. Joel Ben Izzy, some of you know the name, premier storyteller. I'm proud to call him a friend. Joel Ben Izzy, he's a folk teller by nature, but he tells an awful lot of personal tales as well. Wrote a terrific book called The Beggar King and the Secret of Happiness. And he lives in Berkeley, teaches a couple of classes at UC Berkeley. And he has created a method for identifying the natural storyteller in you, natural storyteller in us. It's called going to the well. You just heard two stories where two people went to the well. That young man went to the well, and the person at the bar went to the well. And I'm going to ask you to go to the well in just a moment. Going to the well means that you dig deep and you think of a moment that's memorable, but you just don't think of the moment. You think about how it smelled, how it tasted, how it looked, what the other person was doing, what was the time of day, what was the setting, how old were you, what was the dialogue, how did you feel before, during, and after that event? What did you learn from it? How does it unfold in your mind? What's the mood? What's the tone? Well, that's what these two storytellers did without even realizing it. For those of you who were at the TSA festival, I know Michael Winters and I were in the session with Bernadette Nason. Some of you may have been in her program, her workshop on memoir writing. It was fantastic. And she did a really great example of going to the well without realizing it's going to the well. The assignment was she asked us to think about a car that was in our lives when we were kids, a car that our fathers or grandfather might have had. Where was it parked? In the driveway. What color was it? What was the year? What was the model? Did it have any dents in it? Who drove it? What was the color inside? And then she said to us, go walk to the driver's side and hold onto the handle, and what do you see inside? And then walk over to the passenger side, hold onto the handle, and look inside, and what do you see? Now, this is an example of going into the well because you're asked to tap into your senses, right? To your senses, not just visuals, but your senses, feel, touch, sound, smell, movement. And I remember doing that, and I loved this exercise. What I came up with, for example, I said that I was looking through the passenger side, and I remember seeing cracker crumbs on the seat. And it's because my grandmother used to bring crackers with her and put them in her purse when she took a 1.5 mile drive down the street to see her sister, my Aunt Ruthie, because she was afraid of starving. She was in a concentration camp for 3 years, and she was always afraid of starving. That was powerful. That was really powerful. And I dug deep and I went into the well in order to crystallize that in my mind. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to go into your own well. And I'm going to give you a situation. Think about it. Jot down some notes, but tell me what you come up with. You are young, and this is a time with your friend, a good time with your friend. Maybe you were going to a movie, maybe a ball game, maybe you're going to a party, maybe you're just hanging around fishing, maybe you were just talking in the woods, throwing a stick at each other, whatever you were doing. Think about that moment for a moment. Think about that moment with your friend. What were the smells? What were the sounds? What did he or she look like? How old were you? What did you sound like? Where did you go? What was the setting? What did you think when you experienced that event? Why is it important to recreate it in your mind? Think about that for a couple of minutes, and take a couple of minutes and jot down some thoughts and see what you come up with.
Hank, this is Janet. Do you want them to raise their hands so they can talk or
No,
prefer?
no, 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 they're okay. I'm going to ask them if they want to speak or if they want to put their thoughts in chat, whichever is more comfortable. But thank you, Janet. Okay, everybody have something down? Okay. Michael, Grundy, what did you have down? Share with us what you said about that moment with your friend.
Oh, okay. The moment I had with my friend was a friend of mine, his name was Gary, and Gary and I worked at a hamburger stand together. It was called Griff's. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Griff's, but the good thing was after we worked, we would always take a whole bunch of extra food that was left over, and we'd go park the car, sit around, and drive around a small town and eat. And I can remember this one night we did just that. Gary's a tall, lanky black kid who played basketball, and I was a real short, small kid. I wrestled, but we all back in those days, you still had to have a job, so we worked and when we got off work, well, we were driving around, and I think it was in Gary's car, and we had the smell of French fries and hamburgers was all throughout the car, and we were sucking in on chocolate shakes and just getting full, riding in a little town. And all of a sudden, we saw these two girls on the corner, two little girls that we pulled over and picked up. Now, we didn't know then, but that was not going to be a good move. And when we talked to the little girls, of course, they said that they were, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, but close to our age, whatever. And we started to drive down the block, and we hadn't gone a whole block before all of a sudden we hear the sounds and see the lights of the police. And of course, they pull us over, and turns out that these two girls, well, they were underage. They were maybe 14, and they had gone to a party, and their parents were looking for them. So the parents had called and put out the APP or whatever. So the police had just noticed the little girls and just found them on the corner, and just when they were getting ready to go pick up the girls, we drive up and we picked up the girls. Well, back in those days, that would have probably been 1968, 1970, so whatever. And it wasn't really smart for two young black guys to pick up two little white girls. And because of that, the policeman didn't treat us very kindly, took us straight to the county jail, put us in the jail, and we heard the banging loud sound of that door when it closes. Oh, that's a terrible sound if you've never been to jail. And for hours, they teased us and taunted us about, oh, wait till I tell your dad. And then after a couple hours, they let us go, and we went on home, and it was all over. I learned right then not to go pick up girls in the middle of the night, no matter what.
Yeah, especially when they're 14. Hey, when was the last time you thought about that story? Years ago, weeks ago, days ago?
It's probably been a little while, probably years.
Okay. All right. Good. That was great. That was
or any other time I drive by and think about picking up girls, I think about it.
Oh, yeah. That would be the ignition key. No pun intended. Yeah. Who else? Rick? Rick, do you have something to share? Have you got a going to the well episode with friends? Chester, what about you?
Yeah, sure. I'd always have an opportunity to talk. My dad ran a service station in a very small town where we lived, and he was a hard worker. I worked part-time there. Mm-hmm. And on Sundays, he would go, he worked the other 6 days, but then he'd work a half a day Sunday morning, and Sunday afternoon, I'd come up and relieve him. I'd work. And on Sunday, it was pretty slow in a small town anyway. So a lot of my friends would come by different kinds of friends with different kinds of experiences. And of course, when you're in high school, you're very philosophical about all kinds of things. And so there were just lots of little conversations. But you made me think of one in particular who I think now lives in Houston, Hank. He was a high school, he's a year behind me. He wound up having polio. And this is in the mid-50s we're talking about. And you know how bad that was at that time. But he was a great reader. And he turned me on to, he identified for me books I had never heard of before that had to do with comedy writing. And for example, the one book I've always remembered, it was entitled, I Was Born an Only Child, or something like that, or My Father Was an Only Child. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, that you brought that back. And then other people would just stop by and again, we'd talk about all kinds of stuff, or we'd all clean on our cars or that sort of thing on a nice, lazy Sunday afternoon in Western Oklahoma.
Beautiful. And you know, same question I asked Michael. When was the last time you thought about this guy?
Oh, it's been a long time.
Yeah. You know, and what now this is important to know that whenever we're interested in cultivating a skill set for personal narratives, all we're really doing is finding a moment frozen in time, and the story lets it thaw. It just lets it thaw. And that's when we talk about how a story unfolds. Let's do a couple of more. Valerie, do you have one? You don't have to share anything, just wondering if you do.
I've got one.
Okay.
Is that me, Hank?
Yes.
I'm Irish, and I left home when I was 18. I worked for a few months babysitting and packing tomatoes so that I had enough money together to pay the trip to the Black Forest. I'd found a job in the Black Forest as a trainee hotel manager. Didn't know what I was in for. But I loved the fact that there were people, lots of people, and it was a wild new world for me on the cusp of having just finished high school and becoming an adult. I felt very, very adult as I bought 2 suitcases, on my own money. And I got on the train and traveled, and it was 2 days of travel, 2 ferries and 3 trains all the way to the Black Forest. I lived in the Black Forest on the top floor of the hotel where all the female trainees lived. We were safe. We had to be in by 11 at night. My only breakout was there was an older girl there who must have been 3 or 4 years older than I. She was rather portly, very, very German. And I didn't speak much German at that time. And she wanted to go to the Kurhaus. This was a Kur city where people went to take the waters. And it's a tradition in Germany paid for by the health insurance. People usually stay 3 to 6 weeks, and they usually have something health-wise. So I wanted to go to the Kurhaus, and there was a nightclub there. And I'd never been to a nightclub in my entire life. I had been to dances in Ireland where boys and girls, but boys stood at one side of the room, girls at the other. And when the music started, the boys would stream across, grab the first girl they could get and dance like crazy. And when the music was over, they would leave her in the middle of the dance hall and walk back to their side of the road. So I wanted to be a grown-up. And there were older men here at this dance hall and at this nightclub. And a jazz band played, and I had never heard jazz before, and it was fantastic. And I listened. And she ordered 2 bottles of wine. She said, we need 1 bottle each. I had taken the pledge when I was 7, never to drink alcohol in my life, because Ireland had a big problem with alcoholism. And when I made my first communion, I promised I would never, never, ever drink alcohol. But being grown up, you had to drink alcohol. It was part of it, being grown up. So I drank a whole bottle of sweet Sauterne that evening. It was fantastic. It was good wine. I loved it. And I danced with older men, a lot of them. I was 19 and she was maybe beginning 20s. I didn't notice until the next day that I had alcohol poisoning. I was sick for 3 days. That's how I grew up in a very, very short time.
Wow. It's a wonderful story. Wonderful story. These are great. I know that all of you have one. I know that you do. I want to unfortunately we don't have the time to go through all of them, but I want you to understand that when you do this, you know, when you do the process, whether we hear the story or not, you're doing something very special. And I wanted to demonstrate something to you because it's already happening. I did this workshop, a similar workshop a few days ago, and I did the same kind of exercise. And I did it a little differently. First of all, I asked the folks, okay, tell me about the experience with the emotions that you felt. And then I want you to describe the emotions and describe them. So for example, one of them said it was funny. And then I asked, okay, now describe the emotions. And she said, it was like I was laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. Another person said, well, I felt sad. And then I asked, okay, describe that. And he said, well, my tears flowed nonstop. I asked another young lady to talk about an emotion, and she said it was hard to move. And then she said it was like walking in wet cement. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is that when you go to the well, like you just did, whether we heard your story or not, when you go to the well, you innately, immediately become descriptive. Does that make sense? You become descriptive. You say things like, my tears flowed nonstop, not I felt sad. The natural process of being descriptive comes when you go to the well and you tap into senses, because senses precedes the perception. We have to know how you felt, but we have to know what you saw, what you smelled, in order to see the image itself. I wanted to play a story for you that I think will make some really good sense. Dean, this is the Harwood story, My Father's Hand. Harwood is a friend of mine. Michael Winters knows him as well. This is a story that he told at the MOTH competitive storying event. And if I asked you, could you tell a story about a set of hands? You might think I'm a little nuts. But here is what Harwood did.
Is it just me or no sound?
No, I don't hear anything either.
Neither do I. But it looks good.
Yeah, Dean, we don't have any sound.
Also bipolar, and if you don't know what that is, it's just
Keep the applause going now for
Thank you.
Harwood Taylor.
perfect. Thank you. I always remember loving my father's hands. In the mid 60s and the early 70s, I was probably about this high, and I would put my chin right where his typewriter was. And he had one of those old stacked key typewriters. Remember the tick, 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 tick. That sound was ever present, and it was like white noise in our childhood. And he was also a draftsman. He did these beautiful drawings with charcoal, and he would use his fingers. They would turn black, pushing the material around to shade or contour a figure drawing. And I saw his fingers in wet clay. There was just a grace about his fingers and his hands that I just always remember being fascinated by. He was also bipolar, and if you don't know what that is, it's just basically a chemical imbalance that'll make you, maybe very excitable and high sometimes, and also very low sometimes. It can be very scary, frankly, for a young family, and it was for me and my sisters. And just to give you a fuller picture, I mean, that sort of feeling of uneasiness. I loved my dad, and he was creative, and he was brilliant, and could be very entertaining, but just emotionally didn't feel safe. For the last probably 15 plus years of his life, my sisters didn't speak to him. I, on the other hand, decided after lots of therapy and men's work is when you try to get closer to your dad and try to heal wounds usually. And it enabled me to commit to have breakfast with him every Sunday. And I remember one Sunday, one of my sisters said, "How can you do that?" And I said, "It's service work." And she laughed, and I said, "I'm not kidding. I mean, it really was that hard to have breakfast with him. It was just that I didn't feel safe." So anyway, that was when he was 70. Well, when he was 82, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I didn't know anything about it. It scared me, and I called, got online, looked up everything I could learn about it, and I found the Houston Alzheimer's Association. Great organization, by the way. And they had these classes, and they would put the patients, my dad included, in one classroom, and they'd put me and the other caregivers in the other classroom. And afterward, we'd come and have lunch and talk about things, and it was the kind of stuff you never want to have to talk about, period, on earth. And yet, we got closer. And my heart certainly opened a little bit, knowing that one day he might look at me and, not know who I was. So, going to pick him up one Sunday and for our obligatory Sunday breakfast, and it's not obligatory anymore. I want to be with my dad now, because I know that, time might be short. And we're driving along, and I look down, and his 82-year-old hand, beautiful 82-year-old hand, is sitting there on the middle console. And I just had this nice thought: I want to hold my father's hand. And I'm driving, and I came to a red light, and I looked down, and I couldn't do it. And I was so scared. And all these things were going through my head, like, you did all this therapy, and then these men's groups, and, what is this? I can't hold my father's hand, my 82-year-old father's hand. What's wrong with me? And then I thought, how many times did my dad hold my hand, little Harwood's hand, as a boy, as a child? Maybe my little hand in his hand, maybe every day, thousands of times. What's wrong with me? Well, luckily, or saved by the green light, I started driving again, turning this over in my head, and I come to the next red light. I look down, and I see his hand again, and I just say, I want to hold my father's hand. I can't do it. I thought, is he going to use that sharp wit and say something mean to me? Is he going to pull his hand away? Would he hit me? Because he had hit me. So I remembered I was here in Houston, and I turned onto Heights Boulevard, and there was a stop sign, and there wasn't anybody behind us. There happened to be a woman sitting on a bench. I don't know why we caught eyes. And when I took my hand off the steering wheel, it was just a few inches to touch my father's hand, but it might as well have been my foot leaving a 1,000-foot bungee jump. It was the scariest thing I did in my life. And when I touched his hand, immediately his other hand came over and covered my hand. And it was like he'd been waiting for me to do that. And it felt strangely, familiar, like we had been doing it forever. For the last 2 years of my father's life, whenever we went anywhere in a car, we held hands.
Okay, well, I take it that you like that story. It's a beautiful story. And I want you to notice the focal point of that story. It's a story about hands. And what I'd like to do now, and now we've seen that story to kind of get us thinking about a different domain, I want to start looking at the building blocks of a personal narrative and show you a few others, a couple of others that will help us put some things together. So one I wanted to talk about is coherence. We need to make our stories coherent, right? None of our stories should be meandering from one point to another without any apparent destination. It's not our job to take our listeners on a fanciful journey into the unknown. Spoken communication is harder than written because you can only say it once. So coherence is really critical. Dean, if you'd be so kind as to put up the sheet that says exercise on coherence, I would appreciate it. There we go. Yeah, make that a little larger. Okay, good. And I want to make all of these available to all of you, so don't worry about it. I'll make these available. Now, when you prepare a story, all right, this is a preparation stage. Coherence is really important. Now, sometimes we structure a story chronologically. Sometimes we do it through flashbacks, right? There's all sorts of ways for us to do that. But in this case, we'll wait till we get it centered here. I want all of you to see this at the same time. Can we get that centered? Okay, let's just leave it like that. Let's just leave it like that. Just leave it like that. We're good. No, it was fine before. Okay, let's just leave it like that. Just don't touch it. Okay. All right. I guess no one's paying attention. All right. So when you put together a story, one of the things that you need to think about doing is to put together all the details. List the details in a story, but you don't have to worry about putting them in order. Put them in order after you have them listed. Now, I don't have it up there, so I don't know how to do this with you, but those were out of order. All of those details were out of order. And what I wanted you to see is how you put them in order and immediately have a story. Can we get those up again? Are we not just, we can just leave that right there? Okay.
I'm not sure what you want me to do, Hank.
I want us to be able to see it.
You're not seeing it?
No.
I see it fine.
Yeah, we can see it.
We can see it fine.
Okay, I cannot, so I apologize. Okay, if you take a look at that and you make a story out of it, try to take the first detail and go in order and see if it makes any sense. Because it does not, right? And frankly, there isn't even a way of objectifying this. In other words, these have to follow a certain order. You could hear him yelling a mile away. He was mad. He ran out of the house, got into his car, slammed the car door behind him. He sped down the street. He hit a parked car. Officers got to the accident scene. He rolled down the window, explained how angry he was at his daughter. You see that, what I'm doing? Okay, now that's not the same order that you see on the screen, and I apologize because I don't see what you see. So when you put together a personal narrative, one of the easiest things that you can do is to jot down the details in the story, make your selections about the segment of the story that you want to tell, just list them, and then put them in order. And then voila, excuse the adage, you've got the story as it unfolds. Now, of course, you have to worry about packaging it. What do you want as far as a powerful opening statement? But at least you have coherence. I've got another exercise, and this is just an exercise. I have another exercise to show you, which is kind of fun, and it works if you kind of take it seriously. How many of you ever do browser histories? If we could show the browser history, that goofy browser history, Dean, I'd appreciate it. Okay, let's hold it right there. See that browser history? Now, the 9-year-old who says, you know, little kittens and puppies, we already know what she's all about. But what about the crazy one on the right? That is one of my more sane browser histories. Now, if I asked you to put that in story form, you know, you couldn't do it, or you'd be speculating. You would have to guess. But what if I said to you, I was watching The Weakest Link one night. Okay, I'm not seeing it. I need to see this. I'm not seeing it. All right, don't worry about it. I'm watching The Weakest Link one night, and there was a question about generals and how many presidents were generals. And I couldn't believe the answer was 12. I said, 12? So I looked this up, and I found out that 6 of them were in the Civil War. Chester A. Arthur, James Garfield, Andrew Jackson, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, and Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, I thought he was president. Well, it turns out that if you're a brevet a general, or if you are a brigadier general, or if you are commander-in-chief, you're still considered generals. So these guys are all generals. I don't know what made me think about Rutherford B. Hayes, but I did. Found out that he's from Ohio, of course, I knew that. He practiced in Lower Sandusky, Ohio, and I remember Sandusky. I'm from Cleveland, and I used to go to Cedar Point, and it was great. Took my dates there all the time. And I also remember there was a film made at Cedar Point called The Edge of 17. And it was a great movie. And I didn't remember the cast, but I looked it up, and one was Woody Harrelson. And Woody Harrelson played this really wonderful teacher in this film. And I was curious about him. I'm always curious about actors' bios. Turned out he went to Hanover College, and I like to do the virtual tours when I get on these sites. So I did a virtual tour, and I went to the Duggar Library, and I was fascinated to learn that that library at Hanover College is more extensive than the collection at Princeton University. Now, that makes sense to you, I hope, right? I'm putting it together, and that's another thing that we can do in putting together our stories. Practice your browser histories. How do you put that together so that it makes sense? Coherence is one of those building blocks that we have to think about and take seriously. Another one is resonating. Now, resonating is a term that we know exists, but sometimes we are confused. We think that, well, a story isn't going to resonate unless the listeners experience exactly the same thing. And that isn't true. If my car was stolen and all of your cars were stolen, and I told you a bad story, it would still be a bad story, even though your cars were stolen. Resonating is something else. It is whether or not the story rings true. We don't have to have any experience exactly with the same narrative in order for it to resonate. So, for example, well, let me go ahead and play this story. It's my story, Dean, the one called Love Hurts. This is a story about friendship. We all have friends, don't we? I hope you do. If not, that's why you don't go to parties. But this is a story about friendship. And one of the things that people have said to me is, it resonates, it resonates, it resonates. So let's see if it does with you. This again was at the MOTH, and this is about a friend of mine whose death it was his anniversary. Hi. You know, one of the greatest things about being part of a storytelling community are all the friendships that I've made, and so many of them are out there, and I couldn't possibly do without them. And one of the things that's really everybody can see it growing older is losing a friend.
Yes. Yes.
I had such a friend. This Friday will be a year when I lost one of my dearest friends. His name is Mike, and he and I knew each other when we were 4 years old. We did everything together, and the most extraordinary thing about our relationship is that it really wasn't very extraordinary. It was pretty ordinary. It was uniquely simple. We used to sleep over each other's house all the time, for example, and usually on Friday nights, we used to take blankets and sheets and stuff them in the mattress and in the dresser drawers and make a tent, right? We were 5, 6 years old, and we'd get under the tent and we'd watch B-rated horror movies all night, cartoons in the morning. Movies were our things. We used to go to the show every Saturday, literally for years, matinees. It cost 25 cents, and I'm not that old, so don't look at me that way. 25 cents, 15 cents for popcorn, 10 cents for soda, 5 cents for candy. I mean, for less than $1, you can throw up all day. It was really a lot of fun. The movies were, you know, Tarzan, Abbott and Costello meet Tarzan, and the matinees were 2 hours apiece, so every 2 hours, the same movie. And what we used to do was to see the first movie, and then we would duck when it was over. We thought that was fun, and the ushers wouldn't see us. We had ushers in those days, and then a few minutes later, we'd pop up and see the movie again, right? Silly things, nothing extraordinary. We talked all the time about everything. We talked every week through college. We spent talk time every month for the next 20, 25 years, and then maybe every other month, but no longer than that. This went on for about 45 years until he was placed in hospice care. And then we talked every day. Mike had a kidney transplant, a heart transplant, small cell lung cancer, both lungs. It was amazing that he lived that long. Every day we talked about memories, things that mattered, simple things, but everything that defined us in our lives. One day, I didn't know this would be his last day, but I got on the phone and I was ready to talk to him again. We had done so for 16 straight days, and his wife, who I also knew very well, Randy, said, you know, Hank, listen, Mike can't talk. He just can't talk, so I'm gonna put the phone close to his ear. And whatever you have to say, I'm hoping that he just hears you, but he can't talk, so please don't expect a response. So she put the phone right by his ear, and I said, Mike, do you remember in kindergarten, I was really scared to death, and my mother used to come for the first couple of months in school, and she'd be watching me through a window in the front door of the classroom because I was terrified, right? And do you remember Miss Bradford? My God, she was awful, our kindergarten teacher. She embarrassed everybody. And do you remember, Mike, I peed in my pants, and she just said to me, oh my God! Now, he's not supposed to say anything, right? All of a sudden, a few moments later, I hear, yes, I remember. You embarrassed the shit out of me. I tried to tell people that I didn't know you, but it was too late. And a few moments passed, and I was laughing, and I said, I love you. And he said, you're also a sap. And then I said, Mike, when you're able, give me a sign and let me know that you're all right. And I hung up. About 3 hours later, Randy called me and said Mike passed. But she said, I couldn't believe it. He was happy. He was smiling. I don't know what you were talking about, but whatever it was, it made him really happy. That's what friends do, right? They make us happy. It hurts so much when they're gone because we make decisions about our friends, don't we? One of my favorite memories is in high school, we used to watch the streetlights in the snowstorm, and we used to ask each other, you think school will be canceled tomorrow? Well, we lived in Cleveland. It always snowed. We were always shit out of luck, but we thought anyway. A few months after he died, I remember I was in the men's room and an elderly man comes in and he's standing right next to me and he says, my God, I almost peed in my pants. And I'm thinking, Mike? But that wasn't the sign. The sign was pretty obvious. I had the good fortune of being called tonight, just a few days before the anniversary of his death. And the sign is having the good fortune of telling this story to you and hoping you like it. So Mike, I'm glad you're all right. And to all of you, peace. Thank you. Okay. Well, let me just ask you, point blank, did that resonate with you? Anyone? Did that resonate with you?
I missed most of it because my 14-year-old laptop, Mac, one of the first ones that was ever made, threw me out. So I had to get back in.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Well, we
sorry.
are recording this and and I can get all of that to you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. Michael, it resonated with you. How come?
Oh, yes. One, because your friend's name was Michael, of course. But
Right.
then it reminded me of good friends and going to the show and doing all those same things and
Yeah.
being close to somebody and having to let them go.
It's about closeness. It's about intimacy, right? It isn't about, do I know him? Did we do exactly the same thing? Everybody does different things, but relationships are built differently. One of my favorite plays is I Never Sang for My Father. And one of the great lines is, death ends a life, but it doesn't end a relationship that struggles in the survivor's mind. Michael Winters, you had a comment.
It resonated with me because I had a friend that died in January, and somebody I had meant to be closer to, and we had lots of text conversation, but I hadn't seen him in a year. And I finally, he stopped answering his text, and his family said, he's really getting sick. I know that he'd been sick, but I thought he was going to rally.
Right.
And they said he's really sick. And I was able to go see him on a Wednesday, and he wasn't communicating, but I held his hand and he squeezed my hand.
Wow.
And then he died a couple of days later. So it was just, just to know, to feel like being with your friend was really powerful.
Yeah. Resonating is it's a tall order. It's a tough one, because so far, what are we really talking about in this workshop? And I hope you're getting something out of it, because this is a crazy kind of workshop. It isn't anything that you're working on in terms of shopping. It's not like you're building a pen and pencil set. We're looking at things that create good narratives, and we are trying to extract from our own skill sets how we can maximize it to tell these stories as well as we can. So we know that coherence works. We know that there are ways of creating a coherent story. We know that we can take an element of a story, a segment of that story, a focused element, the part that we want to tell. We can jot down the details, not worry about putting them in order, look at them, put them in order before we can carve out a package by which we deliver it. We know we can do that. Resonating comes from the fact that the story has to ring true with you before it can ring true with anyone else. Anybody read a 700 Sundays, Billy Crystal? Anybody? Couple of you? One of my favorite books, and Billy Crystal is one of my favorite storytellers. There is a story that he tells, you can find it on YouTube, where he's talking about playing ball with his dad in the park. Now, that's about as simple as it comes, right? Now, I never played ball with my dad in the park because I didn't have a dad who wanted to play ball in the park with me. And I listened to the story, and the story is, and this is exactly what he says. He says, you know, my dad's throwing pitches to me, and he could pitch pretty well because, you know, he played ball in school, and he's pitching. And Billy is doing this. He says, and he's pitching to me, and I'm going for the fences, and I'm going for the fences. I'm trying, and I'm swinging, and I'm missing, and I'm getting frustrated. And my dad says, Billy, you're not a power hitter. You're not a strong man. You're not a big man. You're a short guy. Just meet the ball. Just meet the ball. Just get a hit. Meet the ball. So I paid attention to him, and I didn't hit the first couple, and then just a little blooper in the right field, and then another one in the right field. And he's pitching, and I'm hitting. And he's pitching, and I'm hitting. And all I could do is look at my dad. And with every hit that I made, his smile became just a little bit wider. Every crack of the bat, his smile. That was my dad. Well, that resonated with me, right? And some of you are smiling, you're listening to that. That's the kind of stuff that's made of dreams. You know, there's glory in story and resonating, my God. And let's talk about a focused episode. Now, here's one where there are sometimes a little bit of disagreement, because sometimes we say, well, I want to tell a story about the day. I want to tell a story about my vacation. Well, you see that in the story that I just told you, I'm talking about essentially a phone call and memories with my friend. Harwood told you a story about just wanting to hold his damn father's hand while driving in a car. These are just a few moments. In the next story, Eric Heen, very good friend of mine, Michael Winters knows him well. He's a member of TSA, tells a great story about something that occurred in a 30-minute period of time. In my honest opinion, this is the best example of what we mean by a focused episode. So, Dean, if you could play Love Hurts by Eric Heen, I would appreciate it.
My wife, Katie, once told me that I should be more romantic. So I thought about it, and I thought, nah. But then one day, this romance issue just exploded.
Everybody can hear it?
Katie went out of town to visit her parents for a week. And the first day she was gone, I was cleaning some clutter out of our storeroom. And from way deep in the back corner, I unearthed a box full of romance novels. I felt like my wife was cheating on me. Like she needed some fictional romance heroes to fulfill her needs. But then something struck me. There, at my fingertips, lay a treasure trove of forbidden female secrets. And I had an entire week to decode them. I could show Katie a real romance hero. So I took the box to my living room. Over the next 7 days, whenever I had a chance, I'd study these things to learn once and for all what it is that women want from men. It was the most baffling week of my life. I'm thumbing through the first novel. I come to this scene where some guy named Magnus swoops a woman named Elizabetha into his arms and spins her around. So I say, okay. So I make a note of that. And I practiced this swooping maneuver to use on Katie. I just used our basset hound. Well, as I was reading these, I began to notice something funny about the dialogue. Now, people haven't spoken like this for like 600 years. The men were using words like cherub and quenchless inferno. So I made a note of that. I began learning this archaic love language. Oh, and they'd always sneak a little bit of French in there. Just out of the blue. Mon chéri, je t'aime, blah, blah, blah. So I learned a little bit of French. And then there was the sex. These weren't like novels from the 1920s. These were contemporary. These were lurid. And the men in these books set the bar pretty high. And too high. And they never just go right in for the big shebang. These guys would carry on forever with nuzzling and nibbling and caressing and forever. In this one book, some fireman named Devlin he went on nuzzling and nibbling for 20 pages. So I made a note of that. And I practiced nuzzling and nibbling at nighttime with my pillow. Well, by the end of the week, I was ready to dazzle Katie with my newfound romance skills. Sunday night, I meet her at the door, long-stemmed rose clenched in my teeth. I hand her the rose and I say, "Welcome home, my cherub." Then I lead her into the living room and I swoop her into my arms. Now this hurt my back, but okay, it did hurt my back, but the pain made me feel like a martyr for love. I hobble over to the sofa and I plop her down and I sit next to her. I look her in the eyes and I say, "Moi j'étais là, moi, la doule la bleue." I start getting ready for the nibbling and the nuzzling. Then Katie looks at me and she says, "I see you found my romance novels." Well, right then, I gave up the charade. I'm just me. I'm not a romance hero. I'll never be able to swoop her into my arms like Magnus, speak French like Pierre, or go on in bed for 20 pages like Devlin. Then Katie scooted up to me and she said, "Eric, I wouldn't trade you for all those romance heroes in the world." Quenchless inferno. Thank you.
Okay, I guess you like that story, right? And, you know, again, as I said at the beginning of tonight's session, I think it's really important to be able to see stories, talk about stories more than anything else. You know, our ability to sort of harness our own common sense and our love for storytelling based on the experiences that we see and nurture, I think are really important. So I'm glad you like that story, but that story is again an example of a focused episode. Now, there are ways for us, if we're interested in telling personal stories, to really work on focused episodes. So for example, sometimes we can force an episode by creating some fill in the blank. So for example, something like, I didn't think my day could get any worse until I, what, right? So you're not talking about, I'm going to tell a story about my day. No, I didn't think my day could get any worse until I, she was always mean to me. So I was surprised when she blank, right? My vacation was fabulous until blank. It was a normal day until I got home and saw blank. Get the idea? I can get embarrassed easily, but never as much as the time that I blank. Okay. And, you know, another thing that we could do in order to really work at this focus, because focus is important. Depth is more important than breadth. A lot about a little rather than a little about a lot. Sometimes we think, well, I need a lot of time to tell a story. There's nothing wrong with telling a story that's 10 or 15 minutes long, but you need to be aware of attention span. You need to be aware of that. You know, most of the stories that I tell are 5 minutes, 6, 7 minutes at the most. I'm used to doing it that way. I figure if I'm given 10 minutes, if I tell an 8-minute story and it isn't very good, they're going to like it anyway because, you know, I beat the time limit. So time is sometimes a really important thing. The other way to look at focus is to think of some, what I like to call structured prompts. So things like the most embarrassing moment of my life, the best meal, a time that I spent in nature, a time that I spent with the child, a time that I spent with the dog, a time that I had to mourn, a time that I prayed. Sometimes those structured prompts can also give you an opportunity to be really focused. But you know, a story doesn't have to be long in order to be a story. I take this one from Indecent Proposal. Any of you remember that movie? Robert Redford, Demi Moore, Woody Harrelson? You know, he's the guy, he's a millionaire, and he's the one who paid Woody Harrelson $1 million to spend the night with his wife. Remember that? Yeah, even Robert Redford does that. Right, okay. And he was asked, well, why do you do that? And here's what he said. I was on the subway and there was this girl, and she was dressed like someone I never saw before. She was so beautiful. She was the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, but I was shy. And when she looked at me, I looked away. When I looked at her, she looked away. When it was time for me to get off the train, I did. I looked back and she gave me the most beautiful smile I ever saw. I wanted to go back, open those doors, and smile right back at her. But I didn't. I went back to the station, same time, same number of, same station number, same train number for 2 months, every day, and she never showed up. I never want that to happen again. That's the whole idea of doing what you want to do, living for, you know, whatever, but you get the idea. I had a student who wrote something that was very, very touching that I wanted to share with you. And this is an episode. And I think it's a really good example of an episode. I guess her last days, the days when she was conscious, were her hardest. Her bed was downstairs to make it easier for family and friends to visit her. And I remember one morning, early morning, it was actually very early in the morning, my great aunt came over along with some cousins. You know what my mother asked me to do? She asked me to make some coffee because she thought no one had any breakfast. And I looked at her. Coffee? You want me to make coffee? I did, but I hated it. I was mad at my relatives for even being alive, let alone making them food to eat. And I was angry at my mother too. I couldn't believe that she wanted me to make coffee because I wanted to spend every moment with her, and she knew that. But I went into the kitchen and I made the coffee, and then the dog howled. I went back into the room, and my mother was dead. I think she waited until I left the room to die. I've spent 8 years thinking about that day, that moment. I think about it every night. I don't know what to do with it, but I can't let it go. And again, these are all episodes, every one of them. Let's talk about lessons and how they speak for themselves. I know that some of you on this call, I know for a fact, like to offer lessons in your stories, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just the idea person here this evening, just the idea person. And when you offer a lesson for the story, I think it weakens the story.
Exactly.
It's sort of like using words that are necessary because they don't communicate the intensity of that word. So I have a friend who will say, this is amazing. That's amazing. That is super amazing. This is incredibly amazing. Well, what is the difference between super amazing and amazing or incredibly amazing? I mean, that really weakens the word amazing. And how about looking for other words, synonyms? Coming up with a lesson is similar to that. Let the story do the talking. So, for example, if let's say I would have ended my story, the one about friendship, if I would have ended and said, that's a story about how close friendship is. It's a story about how I mourn my friend and how I think about his anniversary of his death. And I really appreciate sharing it with all of you because it was healing for me to think about friendship on that level. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't think you needed that. I think that the story stood itself, and I think that if I'm going to leave my body and float up to the ceiling a moment and be the listener of that story, I would have preferred the way that I told it because I think that's all you needed. And I think it absorbed your attention rather than thinking and contemplating things that aren't really a part of the plan, aren't part of the story itself. You also need a powerful first line. Let's talk about a powerful first line. Michael Winters knows this example. A couple of years ago, I'm at Office Max, and this is one of thousands of examples. I'm at Office Max, Office Depot now, and I'm standing in line. There's one register. All of you have been here. My God, you've been here. You're standing in line. It's a long line. Suddenly, another register opens up, right? And some idiot comes in who thinks he owns the place and just gets in that line, knowing full well that there's a line already waiting. So I very politely said to him, sir, we've been waiting here a long time. And if you don't mind, I think that we need to go to this line and you need to go to the back of the line. Okay? And he looked at me and he said, people like you piss me off. Well, what did I do? People like you, people like you, little goody, little bit of goody, people like you just piss me off. I just want to pummel you to the ground. And I said, you do? Good. Let's go outside. That was real mature, wasn't it? Let's go outside. All right. So people are getting a little aggravated. They're a little, saying, oh my God, what's going on? And he said, no, I'm not going to go outside, but you're lucky. You're really lucky on mine. You're lucky. You're lucky that I'm just not going to take you up on that. Okay. Everything ended all right. Everything ended fine. Now I could start the story and I can say to you, I went into Office Depot and I'm standing in line and this guy comes in, a real arrogant son of a bitch, and he just doesn't see that this group is standing in line. So he just goes to the new register without caring that we've been standing there for a long time. Or I could say something like, you know what? I may be old, but I knew I could take them, right? I could do something like that too. And that might be a little better because it might be a little more intriguing. It might tell you a little bit more about the tone. I don't know. But it's an example of how we start a story in order to engage our audience. We start a story strong. But let's talk about ending a story. Sometimes, and I get a lot of questions about, well, when you end a story, how do you do that so there's a climax? Well, climaxes are important, but it frankly doesn't make any difference where you end your story. It doesn't make any difference. You've got to make that selection. You've got to decide where to end the story, because if you don't, you get people who tell stories like this. And then I just walk out of there. And, I didn't know what to do. I looked back and he was still there. I just walked out of there. So in any event, that's what I did. I just walked out of there, and it's what I did. Just walked out of there. Out of there I walked. Well, for God's sakes, just shut up and end the story, right? I'm wandering, I'm meandering, I'm doing all these. All I have to do is decide where I'm going to end the story, communicate the ending. You have to communicate the ending. So instead of ending the story by saying, I just walked out, I looked back, and I just gave him a dirty look, you don't know if I'm done with the story. But what if I said to you, I walked out, and I just turned around and I gave him a dirty look. End of story. Get the idea, right? Does that make sense? So it's the way that we communicate the ending that brings the story to ending. So it's all about decision making. What are we going to do to start the story strong? What are we going to do to communicate the story at the end to signpost to our listeners that we are, in fact, done with the story? We know that powerful characters are critical. We know that conflict has to be in a story in order for it to be in a story. There's this great video with Kurt Vonnegut, and many years ago, he's doing this writing symposium at USC, and it's a great video. And he says, let's talk about conflict. You want to talk about conflict? I'm going to give you the secret to finding conflict, he says to this graduate class. Everybody taking notes? Because I'm getting paid a lot for being here, so don't miss the secret that I'm about to give you, Kurt Vonnegut says to the class. Are we ready? He takes out a whiteboard, and on the marker, he said, everybody pay attention. Billy wakes up, right? Billy wakes up, and he's going on with his day. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And then suddenly, oh, damn! Although he used another word, use your imagination. That, oh, damn, is the conflict. Conflict is simply something that goes wrong. It's abnormal. It just seems to deviate from the norm. Combat doesn't have to be fighting. We know that. But combat has to require some change of norm, some trajectory that requires us to solve a problem. It could be virtually anything. And it also helps to understand that in personal narratives, you have internal conflict and external conflict. Internal conflict is the conflict that we have with ourselves. Look, what should I do? I mean, I had an affair. Should I tell my wife or not? We've always talked about honesty, but how honest can I be after telling her I'm having an affair? She's not going to buy that. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Am I going to tell her, or am I going to keep it to myself? So we have internal conflict, or we have external conflict, right? Look, I don't know how I tell you this, but I don't want any part of your life anymore. I know that sounds harsh, so all I can say is goodbye, adios, shalom, leave, and don't ever come back. So we have external conflict. They're both very explicit, but you need to ask yourself in every story, is it the internal conflict or the external conflict that you want to exaggerate? That's what you want to ask yourself. And now that I've mentioned the word exaggerating, well, exaggerating is a license for every storyteller. You can amplify anything, because after all, the kiss was a little longer. Wasn't that hurt just a little deeper? The cricket did jump a little higher. That dog bite was a little more painful, wasn't it? We tend to exaggerate things because we want to amplify it. And we know what amplifiers are. They heighten a sound in order to make that sound acute, stark, and understandable. So it's okay to exaggerate things too. But when we exaggerate the conflict, that's how we come up with a story arc and a personal narrative. We also want to be thinking about owning it. What does it mean to own a story? Well, there's actually a very specific technique in owning a story that I think might be very useful, and it's called mental imaging. I use this, and giving yourself permission to tell a personal narrative is a lot different than giving yourself permission to tell a folk tale or a legend. Giving yourself permission means that you're willing to take the risk of whatever information you're about to reveal. But you also want to be careful. You don't want to reveal so much that your listeners become uncomfortable. One thing that we tend to forget, those of us who tell personal narratives, is that it's not about you. It's about the listeners. The story isn't about you. It's about the listeners being comfortable, right? It's about them being comfortable, not about you. So you need to give yourself permission in understanding how to carve this story so that you own it. Giving yourself permission and also understanding that you can't reveal so much that your listeners are uncomfortable. So mental imaging, salespeople use it, athletes use it. They imagine themselves walking across that, or running across that finish line, or having the customer sign on the dotted line. Mental imaging is this, and this is what I do. When I generate a story, sometimes I write it, sometimes I outline it. There's a number of different ways. Sometimes I do what we did earlier, write the details, right? And then I put them in order. I use all of those techniques. But here's what I do when I'm done. I go through the story and I ask myself, how will my listeners look when they smile at this part? Or when they laugh over here? Or when they're crying when I talk to them about that? How will they look when they lean forward with suspense? Or how will they look when their jaw is open because this is so awesome? How will they look when they're afraid? How will they look when I serve up these emotions, which lace the landscape of my story? Because when I see those gestures, when I see the people laughing and smiling, and I see them leaning forward, you know what I say to myself? That is a situation too good to pass up. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean that everything you see is going to happen. But here's the real rub, as Hamlet would say. It will happen more often than you think. Research shows that, statistically speaking, when you engage in mental imaging, you get those emotions more often than you think. You're going to get what you want, in other words. That's how you own that story. That's how you're able to look at your audience and say, if it's an audience of 1, an audience of 100, it doesn't make any difference. As long as you know who your audience is, and you got your demographics straight, and your story is appropriate for them, when you see the emotions, the reactions, the responses that you get in return, you're going to get them. And that is what ignites and keeps storytellers going, at least those who tell personal stories. Some ideas. We all know how to get ideas for personal stories, but I just want to spend a couple of minutes. Think of yourself as a memorist, because that way you're able to think about themes rather than specific little increments in your life. Also, using a photo album is great. You ever sit around and look at a photo album and ask, who are these people? And you put them together. It's sort of like Mission Impossible. Those of you who are over the age of 21 like me may remember Mr. Phelps, Mission Impossible. You got a bunch of photos up there. And my God, they solve any problem, right? They put this together with this. Photos fit together. This is my cousin, belongs to this person, and she belongs to that person. And suddenly you're creating of family ancestry, but it's a great way of practicing the element of personal narrative. What would you grab from a burning rage? If you had 10 seconds to grab something from a burning rage, everybody is safe, your pets are safe, your plants are safe, your family is safe. If you could grab one thing from that burning rage, what would it be? Suddenly you've got a bunch of stories. Because why is it that that heirloom is so very important, right? Why is that heirloom so important? People ask me that question frequently, and I always tell them about my grandfather's watch. You know, many of you know that story. My grandfather told me a story growing up about this gold watch. I didn't even know he had one. But the story was he had this gold watch that he kept in his sock while he was in Dachau concentration camp. Now, as a kid, I have no idea what he's talking about. I don't even know what a gold watch is, let alone a concentration camp. But I loved him. I respected him. So I listened to the story year in and year out. And the story was he had the watch in his sock so the Nazis wouldn't take it away, and so that it served as hope, a symbol of hope that he would one day run across my mother and my grandmother again because they were separated. I didn't know he had the watch, but when he died in 1979, excuse me, a very cold day in April, I remember, a good friend of the family came up to me with a small box, cotton laced, and in it was that gold watch. And under it, a little piece of scratch paper that read, "I love you." That's what I would grab from my burning rage. Get the idea? And that's a story I feel comfortable telling. We all have these heirlooms. And MIT, some of you know what MIT is. It's a university, but it's also a way of preparing stories and getting ideas. It means most important thing, and it's a real thing. It means that when you think about a prompt and it opens the story up, sort of inside out, it's a great way of come with narratives. On my show many years ago, Jay Staley, some of you know Jay, right? You know Jay Staley. He was on the air, and it was a family show on the during the holidays, and he said, "Yeah, you know, boy, I remember that pink mug." He said, "What are you talking about? This is on the air." He said, "Oh, it's a pink mug that I remember." I said, "Well, can you tell us that story?" And he said, "Yeah, let me think about it for a moment." And he did. And he said, "You know, my brothers and I used to sit around the Christmas tree ripping open our gifts because we wanted to, you know, we're so excited. We just rip open our gifts as fast as we could." But I remember that in my mother's last Christmas, we were well in our 40s, and we all met in Dayton, Ohio for what we knew to be her last Christmas. And we sat around the Christmas tree, and she came around the corner with that old pink, ugly, stained coffee mug, the same one she had in 1953. That mug defined her, he said on the air. She came around the corner with that cup filled with coffee. She took that mug, sat in the corner of the sofa that was well flattened because she sat there all of these years, smiled and looked at us. And then we looked at each other, the boys, and we started to rip our gifts open quickly. And then we stopped, almost magically, knowing that we had to slow this down. We had to open the gifts slowly, because maybe we can make this Christmas last longer. And maybe I could see that pink cup just one more time. You know, stories give us a license to do so many things. Many of you have seen the film Big Fish. It's always a film I recommend if you didn't see it. At Edward's funeral, the main character, the Peter Finch character, it's at Edward's funeral, and Will and Josephine, his son and his soon-to-be daughter-in-law, are at the funeral, and they're surprised when all the people from Edward's stories that he tells all of his life come to the service. though each one is a less fantastical version than described in the stories. Because, he talks about Walter Finney, not Peter Finch, talks about meeting a giant and Siamese twins and a little midget. And he talks about all of these characters that in our hearts know never existed, but they all showed up to his funeral. They just weren't as tall. The giant wasn't 11 feet tall, but he was 7'3". The midget wasn't that small. He wasn't from Oz, but he was a little under 4 feet. And suddenly, Will, his son, understood about his father's love. After the funeral, he was committed to passing Edward's stories on to his own son, and in doing so, making his father immortal. That's what stories do for every one of you and for me and for us. Stories, these personal stories, make us immortal. Don't ever think that you don't live forever. Now, if you don't have a story to tell or nobody has a story about you, well, you might dissipate into thin air like a gas grill, I don't know. But all of us are immortal. Storytelling has been around for that reason alone. It's because it gives us something that nothing else can. I have a sheet that I'd like to just show you real quickly. It says tip for the teller. If we could just show that for a moment, I'm just going to take a moment of your time and then also show you a summary sheet. We can show them both, one right after another. Additional tips for the teller. Again, we can make this available to you. Remember, great first and last line, no rant. Personal stories are not about telling everybody how much you hate men or women. Okay, just know that. I had a terrible date, and let me tell you why. That's not a personal story. No meandering ending. It's not stand-up comedy. We don't write an essay, read it, and think we're telling a story. It's not the same thing. Don't use any fake accents when you tell a story. It's insulting to the person you're trying to imitate, and it's really insulting to you. We're not talking about folk tales or legends where accents are sometimes an integral part of the character's personas. And always ask yourself, what are the stakes? What are you willing to risk? Now, on the summary sheet, on the next sheet, I just offer you a few things that you might want to be thinking about. I know that there's no quiz. We're not writing anything down today. You've been a great group, but we do have a summary sheet. I don't know if we can put it up, but even if we can't, you don't have to worry about it because it's there. There it is, yes. A summary sheet, which I think is going to really serve as a catalyst for many of the things that we talked about tonight. The building blocks of a personal story. What do we mean when we talk about being a natural communicator? What is it, a natural storyteller? What does it mean when we talk about finding coherence and resonating? What does it mean when we talk about focus? And why is focus so important? How do we create it? How do we heighten our level of amplification? I wanted to end by showing you a few things that are in chat. I think they're still there. Right, Janet? The few things that we talked about that you put at the very outset. Here we are. Okay. In case you care, I do a radio show. Many of you know that. It's called So What's Your Story? I'm very proud of it. It's the show for which I was given the Trailblazers Award in 2017 because it was the first thing that ever happened in Houston that dealt with storytelling. Actually, the MOTH is here and Rudyard's, and there's other storytelling venues, but in 2008 is when I started So What's Your Story? I was told by KPFT, Hank, it's a great idea, but nobody's going to want to listen to it. In the meantime, 14 years later, they are, and more of them are than ever before. So there, okay. So storytelling is a great thing to offer on the air. You can listen to it if you're in the Houston area. It's 90.1 on the HD1 dial. If not, you can get it at kpft.org, any place on the planet. It's on from 6 to 7 p.m. Wednesdays Central Standard Time. Also, all of the shows are uploaded by our webmaster, Trish Blassengame. She's terrific. And the website, our website is houstonstorytellers.org. If you go to the menu where it says, So What's Your Story? You click on that. All of the shows from 2008 are there. It's a great way to go. It's a great venue, a great platform. It's a great resource. A lot of students use it because they hear hundreds of stories by hundreds of tellers with various themes. Some of you who've been guests, you're on there, so you already know you're there. And those of you who are not guests, I want you to be. And all you have to do is to get a hold of me at Hank Roubicek at Hank Roubicek gmail@gmail.com. And I want you to be a guest, and I want to get you on the air. We have 4 co-hosts. I produce, and I'm the lead host, and Larry Thompson, as many of you know. Eric Heen and Mary Edgerton are the 3 co-hosts, and we do shows every week, and we're always looking for guests. So again, please let me know, Hank Roubicek @gmail.com. I do a lot of writing in the area of storytelling. My most recent book is the 3rd edition of So What's Your Story? Discovering the Story in You. It's Kendall Hunt Publishing. You can also get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and a bunch of other places as well. And this last one, and also Michael Winters and I, have a website called The Story Voice, where we do coaching and performing workshops. And we also have a Story Voice podcast. So all sorts of things going on in the world of me and storytelling. Okay. And the last thing I wanted to share with you is one that's really very poignant and that you might be interested in. I don't know, but it's called A Storyteller's DNA, Growing Up with Holocaust Survivors. You can tell by tonight that telling stories about me being a second generation is really important. There are only about 320,000 survivors left on Earth. One of them is my mother. She's 92, lives in Florida. Her story is the same as millions of others. 7,500 of them die every day. Clearly, in not too many years, there won't be any of them left. My mother is 92, and she's on the younger side of those who remember. So we have to keep their stories alive, because that's what storytellers do, don't they? I mean, that's really our responsibility. It's our obligation. So I do a one-person show. I do a concert, 45 minutes, on what it's like to be raised by Holocaust survivors. So if you're interested in that, for whatever reason, please contact me again at hankroubicek@gmail.com. And the show is called Storyteller's DNA, Growing Up with Holocaust Survivors. Some of the stories are not easy. You know, I'm 5 years old, I'm clinically depressed, right? And I tell my grandmother, what does she say? Oh, were you in a concentration camp? Well, I guess not. So that's how you handle depression. So everything really wasn't all that wonderful. And some of them were very sad, but some of them were pretty magnificent. Well, I have a program that consists of that. And I also would love to take your questions. I'd love to hear your comments. I know it is 10 minutes after 9. I figured we got started at 7:10, so I think we're still good. But I would love to hear your comments, your questions. You don't have to offer them now, but I welcome them. If you got anything out of tonight, I'd love to hear it. If you didn't, well, lie to me and tell me you did. I'm very sensitive. But if there's any questions, I'd love to answer them. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Hey, my comment, Hank, is that you were the right person to tell us about personal stories, and I really enjoyed it, and I learned some stuff and got some good takeaways. I like the idea about going to the well and digging deep, as well as the focus episodes. Those are 2 of the terms I'm taking away with it, and probably my best visual might be the pink mug.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you. And you know what? I just wanted to say that what you're saying is more powerful than you think. All you have to make is one change to change the story, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's what we don't realize. One takeaway is all you need. That's all you need.
Well,
Anybody else? Comments?
I got my money's
questions?
worth. Speak up, folks. Go ahead, Jane.
Jane?
Well, I'm like a fish out of water here. This is a totally different culture to what I'm used to, and I rail against it constantly. But I grew up with stories, and they're woven in and out of my life everywhere.
Yes.
Worked as a journalist. Thank God I worked as a journalist, because I was able to use words. Now, in the eve of my life, the end of my life, I'm 77. I'm beginning to lose words, and I value them more than ever. I will tell stories until I die.
Which won't be for a while.
I hope not.
Yeah. I'm 70 something too. I'm 70-ish too.
Yeah.
So, you know, I hate when people say, now that I'm in my twilight of my life.
Oh, give me a break.
Yeah. You're not.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Anything that, you know?
It's so hard to tell personal stories because you give a part of yourself away each time.
Yes.
And that is not easy. You have to stand apart from yourself and see it as a story, not as a personal pain, not as a personal relation.
You know, Jane, that's a pretty magnificent insight, and it really is a magnificent insight, and it's worth probing for just a moment. That gentleman I talked about at the bar, who told me about his regret, not making a friend with that elderly woman. I know more about him than some people I've known for 30 years. That's the truth. Because there's something about a story that tells you a great deal about a person, does it not? Right? And that's something that we don't talk about much, but it is risky to tell a story. You do share a great deal about yourself when you tell a story, I used to be terrible on first dates because, women would want to know, well, what do you mean you want to know my story? What the hell is that? Because I would ask questions like, tell me about your favorite children's movie. What do you create? Because they would rather treat it like a job interview, right? But no, so a story really does reveal a lot about you. It does, but it tells people things about you. It validates who you are.
Hank, I think sometimes people don't like to tell personal stories because it's risky and they don't like to talk about themselves because sometimes that's like being narcissistic or whatever. And one thing that I learned years ago is if I might be telling my story, but I make somebody else the hero.
There you go.
Ooh.
I love that. I love that.
Yes,
that's a much more powerful way of saying what I attempted to say earlier, which is, it's about the listeners. It's not about you. It's about getting them to feel comfort. And I love that, Michael. Yeah, it's about making them your hero. It's not about, let me tell you about all the great stuff I did. It's about letting you know about my frailties and about my limitations and about my vulnerabilities. And that's a hard word for many people.
If I'm also telling you about all the great things I did, I'm not the hero. I'm not the great one. It was the coach who got me there. It was my dad who got me there. It was my sister who sacrificed. It was all those other people, not me being the hero.
Yep.
I find that if you get into people's minds and let them tell the story to themselves inside with their imagination, and you've given a few prompts, but let them color it and write it in their own mind, then they will accept that story totally. And they will come up to you afterwards and tell their own stories, which they're dying to tell. So you've reached them. You've reached inside their soul. You've reached inside their hearts. And they've taken that story that you have been telling them. And
So
they-
does anybody else have any good takeaways from tonight? Anything that they'll
And
remember?
again, I don't mean to keep you at all. I really don't. I know it's late. It's way past my bedtime. But I just want to make sure that that I answer your questions if you have any. I know that we did an exercise tonight and not everybody had an opportunity to take part. I apologize for that. You know, a workshop is a tough word sometimes. When you have a lot of people and a limited amount of time, but I really do hope that you got something out of it. I do not want you to feel like you wasted 2 hours. That's for sure.
I need to leave, Hank. Really need to
Okay.
leave.
Take care.
So if you
Thank you.
if you guys enjoyed being here and also learned something, was informed, inspired, as well as entertained, you know, do that Zoom thing that we all do, and we'll all say good night and thank you, Hank.
Thank you
And-
very much. It was a
Michael.
pleasure.
And we'll let you know when it's on YouTube and you can go and relive the whole experience again. But thanks again, everybody, for showing up, and make sure you tell everybody in your guilds about how much good times we have.
Thank you.
Thank you again for inviting me.
Thanks, Dean and company, for all the IT work too.
Thanks. Yes.